Hi, I'm Maelis. My family raised their glasses for my brother's new house, like it was the crowning achievement of our bloodline, and I was just the polite applause at the edge of the table. For years, I let them toast him while they ignored everything I built. But that night, over cranberry sauce and sugared lies, I said one sentence that made my mother lower her glass mid-sip. They thought they knew me. They thought they knew my story. But what happens when the quiet one stops playing along and brings receipts? Would you want to know what I said, or what they did after I said it? Thanksgiving at my mother's house had always been a production. Not a gathering, a production. The kind with place cards and flickering candles, the smell of cinnamon rolls baked precisely 90 minutes before guests arrived, and a playlist she'd curated for ambiance that had been the same for the last 7 years. The napkins were folded like swans, literal origami swans, and every plate sat perfectly aligned to the edge of the table, like they were auditioning for a Pottery Barn commercial. I walked in alone, as I had for the last few years, and no one asked who I came with. They didn't need to. They already decided I always came alone. The dining room buzzed with polite conversation. Valora, my mother, moved between guests like a hotel hostess, smiling, adjusting wine glasses that didn't need adjusting, complimenting a pie she didn't bake. My seat, of course, was near the edge of the table. Not the foot, not the head, just edge adjacent. It was the same seat I'd had since college, like the world hadn't moved on, and neither had my role. I scanned the table as I sat. Aunt Donna was already mid-story about someone's son making partner. Cousin Mia nodded dutifully, her attention only half on the conversation. And then there was Joran, my older brother, sitting at the head of the table like he had a deed to the seat. He didn't speak much. He didn't have to. Everyone else filled in the blanks for him. He leaned back, that half smile always perched on his face, like he knew a joke we hadn't been told yet. Valora tapped her glass. Just twice. Soft, controlled. Everyone knew what it meant. "Before we carve into this beautiful turkey," she began, holding her glass high, "I just want to take a moment to say how proud I am of Joran. Of course. He's just closed on the most beautiful home. 4 bedrooms, big backyard, even a separate office for his remote work. It's a real step forward, don't you think?" Murmurs of agreement followed like ducks in formation. Aunt Donna gasped like Joran had just cured cancer. "A real home, finally. That's wonderful, dear." Mia clapped 2 quick, polite taps. Joran, ever humble in appearances, gave a modest nod and looked at his plate. Not once did he deflect the praise. He let it wash over him like rain on freshly waxed glass. I sipped my water. No wine yet. I needed a clear head. "Mehilis," Valora said suddenly, turning to me with a brightness too sweet to be sincere. "Sweetheart, when will you finally settle down too?" There it was, every year, like clockwork. She always saved it for just after the toast, when the mood was warm enough to soften the blow, but not so warm that it would feel cruel. Except it did feel cruel. Her voice dripped with feigned concern, like a dentist asking if the drill hurt while already deep in your molar. The room went quiet. Not silent, but hushed enough that I felt every eye glance sideways in my direction. They expected me to smile, say something vague, maybe someday, or still figuring it out, or the classic, right now I'm just focused on me. Something that let her win without it sounding like I'd surrendered. But I didn't feel like surrendering anymore. I looked at her, I looked at them, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small in my seat. I felt centered. I picked up my wine glass. Slowly, deliberately. I raised it, not high, not to match her, but just enough to make her pause mid-sip. "I already did," I said. She blinked. "Did what?" "Settle down," I replied, letting the words hang in the air like a ribbon unraveling. "I just didn't invite anyone who doubts me." Her glass hovered near her lips, then lowered, quiet as her expression froze in place. Someone's fork clinked on a plate. Even Joran sat up straighter. No one said anything. Not at first. But I didn't look away. I didn't fill the space with nervous laughter or a quick apology. I let the silence bloom. It wasn't awkward for me, it was honest. And sometimes, honesty is the loudest thing in the room. The moment I said it, those 12 words, I felt the table lose its shape, like I'd thrown a wrench into a well-oiled machine and watched everyone pretend they didn't hear the sound. The thing about silence is, it's never really silent. It crackles. It pulses. It makes people squirm more than shouting ever could. I watched Valora carefully lower her glass. The gesture was small, but deliberate, as if she didn't want to spill a drop or, worse, show a crack in her composure. Joran shifted in his chair, jaw flexing ever so slightly. Cousin Mia blinked rapidly, caught between wanting to follow the script and realizing the stage directions had just changed. Aunt Donna let out a breath, quiet but noticeable, like someone had finally opened a window in a stifling room. They all looked at me like I'd knocked over a monument. The turkey remained untouched. Forks hovered. And yet no one reached for the truth that now sat right there, marinated and ready. The conversation picked up again in awkward spurts. Something about traffic on I-5, someone's dog turning 12, the way sweet potatoes always tasted better the old-fashioned way. But the energy had shifted, and they knew it. So did I. I'd been here before. Too many times. I knew the beats of this performance. I could have told you what would come next. The applause for Joran, the polite nods to my existence, the way Valora would glance over with a smile so tight it could cut glass. History always repeated itself at that table, mostly because no one dared rewrite it. History is written by those who get the mic, I thought, staring into my untouched wine. And Joran? He'd been holding that mic since he was 5. Every Thanksgiving had been a rerun. Different centerpieces, same story. Last year, the toast was about Joran's promotion. The year before that, it was the investment property he'd been looking at. And every time, I'd smile, nod, let my name be background noise. They talked around me like I was furniture, present, functional, forgettable. This time, though, the pause was mine. I'd made it. I'd chosen not to fill it. Valora turned to me again. Her voice dipped in honey. So, sweetheart, when will you finally settle down, too? That question had lived in her back pocket for years. She dusted it off annually, like a family heirloom, convinced it still sparkled. My hands didn't tremble. My throat didn't tighten. I didn't feel the familiar sting of being caught off guard. I felt ready. Ready in a way I hadn't been before. Not because I had something to prove, but because I had stopped asking for permission to be seen. I looked at her, not through her, at her. I already did, I said, lifting my glass slowly. I just didn't invite anyone who doubts me. Her smile faltered. The corners of her mouth tried to hold, but her eyes gave her away. She blinked, confused, not just by what I said, but by how I said it. Calm, steady, not bitter, not loud, just final. The clink of her glass as she set it down echoed louder than the entire toast she gave for Joran. No one laughed. No one followed up. They just sat with it. And I let them. I didn't rush to fill the space with small talk or reassurance. I didn't try to soften the blow. I wasn't angry. I wasn't defensive. I was done. Done apologizing for not fitting the mold they built without ever asking what shape I was meant to be. The silence stretched, not awkwardly, but with weight, like it had been waiting years to arrive. I sipped my wine slowly, eyes on my plate, not to avoid them, but to stay grounded in the only truth that mattered. Mine. That table had always made me feel like a guest in my own story, but not tonight. Tonight, I had taken the mic. Not to perform, but to stop pretending I was ever part of the audience. No one reached for their fork, not right away. A few shifted in their seats, as if that could reset the room, make it feel less charged. But it didn't. I had said what I said, and now we were all sitting in it together. The turkey steamed quietly. The cranberry sauce congealed just slightly at the edges of the plate. Joren dabbed at his mouth with his napkin, though I was pretty sure nothing had touched his lips. Even Valora didn't speak, and that was rare. She was a master of redirecting, pivoting tension into something palatable. But this silence, she didn't have a recipe for it. I stared at the butter dish. One corner had already melted into a puddle. Everything in this room was picture perfect, down to the rosemary tucked around the centerpiece. But perfection has no muscle when truth enters. I wasn't sure if I'd shocked them or just stripped away the comfort they'd clung to for years. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt real. Maybe for the first time in this house, I'd shown up as someone they couldn't box in with a smile or silence. I caught my reflection in the silver gravy boat. Distorted, yes, but still recognizable. It was enough. My mind wandered, back to a Thanksgiving years ago. Joren had just gotten promoted to regional manager. I'd launched my design studio a month before. We both had good news. Only one of us got a toast. Valora raised her glass that night with the same glowing pride she used now. To Joren, she said, eyes wet with admiration. He's going places. Then she glanced at me, not even really facing me. And Malis, she's figuring things out. That line stuck. It clung to my ribs like cold oatmeal. She hadn't meant it as a jab, but it wasn't support either. It was dismissal dressed in politeness. Later that night, I'd overheard her whispering to Aunt Donna in the kitchen. Maëlys has always been more creative, bless her. But Joren? He's a leader. I'd kept setting the table that night, adjusting the forks so the tines pointed the same way, pretending my stomach hadn't just dropped. Back at the current table, the silence finally broke. Joren cleared his throat, voice tight like he was choking on something too sharp. You've been quiet for months, and now you just drop this out of nowhere? His laugh was hollow. What is this? Some kind of stage moment? I didn't blink. Maybe it's just the first time someone's actually listening. That earned a few darting glances, mostly from Donna and Mia. Joren leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table like he was trying to take up more space. So where is it then? This house of yours? I took a sip of wine, unbothered. Close. How big? Big enough. You pay it off? That one hung heavier, like he wanted me to flinch. He needed me to say something uncertain, vague, something that could re-establish him as the one on top. Paid in full, I said. His mouth twitched. He masked it with a sip of wine. This is new, Maëlys, he said finally. You don't usually make a scene. And you don't usually ask questions, I replied. But here we are. Valora cut in, her tone light but brittle. Sweetheart, no one's trying to interrogate you. We're just surprised, that's all. You've always kept things so quiet. That's because no one was ever really listening, I said, my voice even. The table shifted. Not physically, but emotionally. The center of gravity moved. For once, it wasn't Joren they were all watching. It was me. Not because I raised my voice, not because I cried or demanded anything, just because I told the truth and refused to soften it. Aunt Donna looked at me like she was seeing something new. Mia blinked slower now, not out of confusion, but recognition. Even Valora didn't move to regain control of the moment. I wasn't seeking applause. I wasn't looking for redemption. But I wasn't going to shrink to fit their expectations anymore either. Joren let out a breath through his nose and said, almost under his breath, Right. Must be nice to surprise everyone like that. What he said didn't sting. It was how much it didn't surprise me that did. Joren didn't let the quiet sit for long. That wasn't his style. He leaned back in his chair like he was adjusting into a more comfortable position. But I knew that lean. It was the setup before the strike, softened by a smile, but packed with subtle venom. So, he began, drawing out the word, what kind of place did you even buy? There it was, wrapped in just enough curiosity to sound like interest, but soaked in sarcasm. He didn't want details. He wanted leverage. I met his eyes, letting the silence hang just a breath too long. Everyone turned slightly, not because they cared, but because they wanted something to fill the gap. A moment like that doesn't invite support. It invites spectators. Without a word, I reached into my purse. My fingers found the phone easily. I'd thought about this moment, but not like this. I hadn't planned to use it. But I also hadn't planned to be challenged like I was someone making things up. I tapped a few times, connected to the TV, and a black screen appeared with the faint sound of ambient piano. Then the title card, Northwest Modern, inside the mind of Malis Carter. The room fell still. The video opened with drone footage of my home, framed by trees, built into the slope of a hillside. Natural light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows. Warm wood panels contrasted against smooth concrete. It was modern, but it breathed. My voice came through the speakers, soft but confident. A home is not just space. It's the refusal to be boxed in. Joren blinked. Valora's lips parted slightly. Wine paused midair. Mia adjusted in her seat, like she wasn't sure if she should keep watching or excuse herself. But no one moved. The video continued, showing my studio, my sketches, the wall of pinned fabric swatches, renderings. Me walking through a construction site with a hard hat. Not 1 second of it staged, all of it mine. The quote played just as I remembered. Design is the art of listening to what a space is afraid to say. I didn't look at the screen. I looked at them, watched how their faces shifted, how Joren's jaw clenched when the narrator mentioned I'd turned down 2 acquisition offers, how Valora's eyes narrowed just a hair when she heard I'd paid for the entire build in cash. I didn't feel vindictive. I just felt free. When the video ended, the screen faded to black. I turned the volume off, placed my phone back into my purse, and took another sip of wine. No one clapped. Of course they didn't. Valora was the first to speak, her tone coated in sugar. 4,000 square feet. That's a bit excessive, isn't it? She laughed gently, like she was trying to pass it off as a joke, but her eyes were sharp. That's how she did it. Insult wrapped in civility. I looked at her, level. It's not big for attention, it's big for peace. The words settled over the table like dust, soft but everywhere. No one knew what to do with them. She opened her mouth, then shut it again. I could see the calculation in her eyes. How many ways she wanted to spin the story back in her direction. But for once, she didn't have the script. I just didn't know you were doing that well, she finally said, her voice quieter than usual, almost small. I wanted to say, you never asked. But this time, I didn't gift her the closure. No one touched their food. Not a single bite had been taken since the video faded from the TV screen. Joren's fork sat idle beside his plate. Mia had tucked her hands under the table, and Valora's wine glass hovered like she couldn't decide whether to sip or set it down. The turkey, once the star of the table, had turned into background noise. I could hear the faint tick of Valora's antique wall clock, and beneath it, the shift in their breathing. Not admiration, not awe. Disorientation. The kind that comes when a story you've told yourself for years suddenly stops making sense. They weren't proud of me. They were stunned by me. There's a difference. One invites you in. The other looks at you like a stranger in your own skin. Valora cleared her throat softly. Her voice came out with that gentle drawl she used when she wanted to pretend something wasn't a problem. Well, darling, she said, not meeting my eyes. I suppose that house must have come with some help. Or inheritance, right? There's no shame in that, of course. The way she emphasized no shame made the shame bloom anyway. It was the kind of sentence designed to sound supportive, but land like a question mark dipped in doubt. Valora never accused directly. She suggested, then let everyone else draw conclusions on her behalf. I stared at her. Then I smiled. You want receipts? I said, folding my hands in my lap. I brought them. I reached down beside my chair and pulled out a slim black envelope from my coat. Clean lines, thick paper. Not flashy, just deliberate. I set it on the table in front of me, without sliding it to her, without opening it, without saying a word. It sat there like a loaded weapon no one wanted to touch. Valora's smile tightened. She glanced at it, then at me. "What is that?" "Title deed," I said calmly. "Closing documents, tax statements, proof of funds, all in my name." Joren shifted in his chair across from me, but didn't speak. I watched him process the weight of it. My presence, documented and irrefutable. For years, he'd carried every holiday with nothing but stories. I had walked in today with facts. No one reached for the envelope. Valora's glass finally made its way to the table. She placed it down slowly, silently, her fingers not releasing the stem until the base touched the linen. There was something in that moment, something so loud in its restraint, that even Aunt Donna stopped fiddling with her napkin. No one needed to open the envelope. That wasn't the point. I hadn't brought it to convince them. I'd brought it to remind myself. I didn't need their permission. I didn't need their validation. I had proof. And it didn't live in their version of me. People don't deny the truth because it's wrong, I thought. They deny it because it makes them feel small. Valora took a breath, then gave a thin smile. "Well," she said, in that tone she used when she was trying to salvage authority, "that's very responsible of you." I let the compliment sit there, hollow, performative. "I've always been responsible," I said. "That was never the issue." She blinked, as if she'd been slapped with a soft cloth. "What was the issue then?" she asked, almost reflexively. "Recognition," I said finally. "The issue was never about what I could do. It was about who you chose to see." The silence returned, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was clarifying. For the first time, the weight didn't belong to me. Valora looked down at her plate. Jorn stirred slightly, but still said nothing. The folder sat untouched, but it weighed more than every toast they ever gave him. Joran's fingers curled tighter around the stem of his wineglass, the knuckles paling to a cold white. The rest of the table sat in stillness, but his tension filled the space between us like static before a thunderclap. I leaned back, calm, collected in a way I knew would unsettle him more than if I'd shouted. The louder the silence, the closer we get to the truth someone doesn't want told. I didn't look at the envelope again. I didn't need to. It was still sitting there, black and quiet, yet heavier than any roast on the table. Joren finally let out a short, tight laugh. "Must be nice," he muttered, not looking at me. "To be so liquid." The way he said it, like liquidity was arrogance, like having stability was a personality flaw. A few family members gave half-hearted chuckles, unsure if they were supposed to laugh or stay neutral. I stayed silent. He wasn't done yet. "I mean, I'm not some trust fund baby either," he continued, louder this time. "I put 10% down. That's normal. That's what normal people do." Valora made a faint noise that could have been agreement or disapproval. Her face gave nothing away. Joran's mouth opened again before his brain caught up. "I'm carrying $400K in mortgage." So what? There it was. He didn't mean to say it. I could see the instant regret flash across his face, the way his jaw clenched, the way his eyes darted toward Valora, as if trying to gauge how much of a mess he'd made. The tone in the room shifted. What had started as smug defensiveness cracked into something rawer, more revealing. Bravado slipping into exposure. His brag now smelled more like desperation. Valora's face tightened, her lips parting ever so slightly. She didn't say anything, but her posture stiffened, like a general hearing her soldier admit the war was going badly. Nobody spoke, but the silence now belonged to me. "You didn't buy that house," I said quietly, not cruelly. "You borrowed your image of success." He didn't respond. Couldn't. He looked down at his plate, but his fork didn't move. Valora inhaled slowly, then tried to catch the tail of control. "He's being responsible, Malis," she said, her voice smoother than it should have been. "He's always been." She was trying to save him, trying to steer the ship back toward the narrative that had always protected him. The golden boy who made the smart moves. The one who followed the steps and didn't embarrass the family. The one who always won by default. He's being celebrated for being loud about borrowed things, I said, holding her gaze. I was invisible for building quietly. That landed. Valora blinked once, twice. Aunt Donna looked at me for a second too long before glancing down. Even Mia's foot, which had been tapping under the table for the last half hour, stopped. No yelling, no dramatics, just a shift in the current. I could feel something recalibrating, not in their approval, but in their awareness. They saw me differently now. Maybe not kindly, maybe not proudly, but no longer as the one who merely helped clean up. Joran's hand dropped from his glass. He stared at the tablecloth like it had betrayed him. Then, without warning, he stood. The chair screeched against the hardwood, a jarring note in the symphony of discomfort. "You had this planned, didn't you?" he snapped. His voice wasn't loud, but it had an edge. Accusation, shame, maybe even fear. I looked up at him, calm as I had been since the start. I didn't respond, didn't give him the argument he was begging for, because I knew what he was really saying. He said it like strategy was worse than silence, but silence had never protected me. The clatter of Joran's chair still hung in the room like a leftover argument no one wanted to touch. He had retreated, but the tension hadn't. It settled in the creases of Valora's tablecloth, in the way Aunt Donna kept straightening a fork that didn't need adjusting, and in how no one dared look directly at me anymore unless they had something rehearsed to say. This wasn't forgiveness. It was recalibration. They weren't waiting to make peace. They were waiting to feel superior again. Conversation picked up in cautious waves. Mia mentioned a new bakery downtown, her voice forced light. Valora responded with a memory from a real French patisserie in Seattle, as if casual nostalgia could bleach what had just unfolded. I let them have it. Let them pretend they weren't flailing under the weight of a broken narrative. Then came the guest. A friend of Joran's, someone's plus one, middle-aged, pleasant enough. The kind of woman who offered to help clear plates, even when she wasn't asked. She leaned in toward Valora and said, "I actually saw Melis's house on my friend Harper's Instagram. Stunning space. Like, Architectural Digest level stuff." The whole table turned to her like a scene in a sitcom, everyone pivoting except me. Valora's voice dropped half an octave. "Your house has been online?" I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The question wasn't for me. It was Valora realizing the world had seen a version of me she never bothered to ask about. Joran, now back in his seat but still stewing, jumped in before Valora could say more. "Well," he said with a forced chuckle, "Melis always liked her privacy, or secrets." There it was, the dig disguised as banter, the jab that pretended to be a joke. I let it sit for a beat. Then, softly but clearly, I asked, "Have you ever complimented me without a dig in it?" The room exhaled like a balloon had just deflated. Even the clinking stopped. Joran blinked. Mia whispered, almost to herself, "I guess not." He didn't respond, because there was nothing to say. That silence? It wasn't awkward, it was necessary. The kind that doesn't demand explanation, only acknowledgement. He wasn't just my brother, he was their mirror. If he cracked, they had to look away from themselves too. I didn't ask to be defended. I didn't ask to be understood. I asked for clarity, and I got it. He had never seen me. Not really, because it would have required him to question everything he'd been celebrated for, and he couldn't afford that. The conversation limped forward after that, clumsy and overly cheerful. Aunt Donna tried to reminisce about an old family road trip. Valora interrupted her to recall Joran's great eye for property when he helped her choose her bathroom tiles 3 years ago. Her voice tried to hit the note of casual pride, but it came out shrill, misplaced. I didn't interrupt. I just smiled and let the lie hang, like a dress that no longer fit. Then Valora turned to me. With a smile too smooth, too swift, she said, Would you consider helping Joran redesign his kitchen? You clearly have the touch. And there it was, packaged as a peace offering, delivered as a power play. She asked it like peace, but it tasted like war. The dining room hadn't gotten any quieter, just colder. The kind of cold that doesn't touch your skin, but settles under it. People were still talking, plates still full, but the warmth was gone. You could feel it in how nobody looked too long in one direction, how they all pretended to be listening while scanning for the next thing to latch onto. That's how people act when their certainty has been rattled. I wasn't outnumbered, not really. But I wasn't part of them either. And I finally understood that wasn't a weakness. It was clarity. Some people mistake being surrounded with being supported. A cousin, I don't even remember which one, chuckled and said, I mean, Milas must have had a backup plan. You don't just build something like that alone. It was the kind of comment meant to sound like a joke, but was designed to cut. The table chuckled, unsure. Valora didn't laugh. She didn't need to. Her voice came soft, like she was easing into a compliment. She's always been so creative, she said, eyes still on her plate. But let's be real, she must have had some help. Surely someone was behind that kind of project. The word someone hung in the air like smoke from a candle just blown out. I didn't flinch. I didn't even look up. I simply anchored myself in that moment, in their disbelief, in their discomfort. They'd rather believe a man handed me something than that I built it with my own 2 hands. Valora reached for her glass again, and as she leaned toward Jorn's girlfriend, her voice not as hushed as she probably thought, I heard her say, I still think there's someone behind that house. Maybe a silent partner. Maybe someone she doesn't talk about. I smiled. Then I rose from my chair. I didn't say a word. I just walked over to the piano in the corner of the room. It hadn't been tuned in years. Valora kept it because it completed the space, though no one had played it since my father died. Except me. I sat down, lifted the fallboard, and let my fingers find the keys of the piece he used to hum when he thought no one was listening. My hands moved slowly, deliberately, not to perform, but to reclaim. Every note was a quiet rebuttal, every chord a refusal to be reduced. When I finished, I closed the piano gently. Not a bow, not a look. I returned to my seat. The room was silent in that awkward way, where no one knows what's safe to say anymore. And then, from the end of the table, Jorn's girlfriend, Lauren, I think, cleared her throat and spoke, gently but clearly. Actually, she said, eyes flicking toward me, Malis helped me redo my entire resume last year. I wouldn't have landed my job at the hospital without her. She coached me through every round of interviews. She blinked after she said it, surprised at herself, as if she hadn't planned to speak, but couldn't hold it in any longer. Valora's hand paused mid-air, wineglass hovering again. Joran's jaw clenched. Aunt Donna tilted her head, caught between curiosity and confusion. Truth doesn't need a microphone, it just needs to be unafraid. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I just sat still. Jorn's shoulders tensed. He didn't look at me. He looked at Lauren like she had broken some silent rule. Valora's fingers curled tighter around her glass, as if that could hold her in place. I didn't gloat. That wasn't the point. I simply looked at Jorn and said, Funny, I help strangers more than I've ever been asked by family. He didn't respond. Neither did Valora. But she did speak a moment later. Her voice low, flat. Maybe that's why you've always seemed so alone. Dessert had made its way to the table. Slices of pumpkin pie, apple crisp, even a bowl of Cool Whip. But no one seemed eager to touch anything. There was too much sugar already in the air, too many moments thickened with things left unsaid. The room was quieter now. Not in mourning, but in recoil. Everyone moved more slowly, spoke more softly. Mia offered to pass the whipped cream, her voice thin. Joran had disappeared into himself, shoulders slumped as if they weighed more than the mortgage he hadn't intended to confess. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired, not defeated, just tired of showing them my full self and still being reduced to a footnote. Silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it's exhaustion. I folded my napkin carefully, almost meditatively, and reached for my coat draped over the back of my chair. I didn't rush, but I didn't linger either. I'd said what needed to be said. The rest of it, they could chew on that over coffee. Then I heard the lightest footsteps, small, deliberate. A soft tug on my sleeve made me turn. It was Sadie, my niece, Valora's granddaughter, 8 years old, if I remembered right. Her hair braided down the middle, like her mother used to do when we were still on speaking terms. She held something in her hands, a worn, dog-eared notebook. The cover was bent at the corners. One page stuck out, folded unevenly. My breath caught when I recognized it. The journal I'd given her 3 Christmases ago. "Dee Dee," she said quietly, using the nickname only she and I still used. "Are you still writing stories like this?" She held it up like it was something precious, like a relic. I crouched down, knees cracking gently, and met her eyes. "I didn't think anyone remembered this," I said, voice low, surprised by the warmth rising in my chest. She nodded, solemn. "I read them when I feel invisible, too." That line hit harder than any of Valora's jabs ever could, because it wasn't loaded, it wasn't bitter, it was honest. The weight of her small voice carried generations. I touched her shoulder gently. "You're not invisible, Sadie." "I know," she whispered, "because your stories say so." She smiled, tooth gap and all, and hugged me so tightly it startled me. Her arms couldn't even wrap fully around my shoulders, but they tried. Behind us, I heard movement, subtle, careful. I looked up to find Valora standing near the hallway, not approaching, not speaking, just watching. Her arms were folded, but her expression had shifted. Not regret, recognition, the kind that arrives too late to undo damage, but early enough to witness change. Sometimes the most honest mirror isn't your child, it's the child they choose to protect. I stood slowly, still holding Sadie's hand. She looked up at me like I was something important, not because anyone told her I was, but because she'd seen it herself. "You matter," I whispered to her, "even when no one says it, especially then." She nodded like she already knew. I turned to grab my purse when I heard Valora's voice. Quiet, unsure. "She looks at you," she said, "like I should have." I didn't turn around. Some truths are heavier when left suspended. The night air outside Valora's house felt colder than it should have. Not sharp, just quiet. That kind of quiet that isn't absence, it's aftermath. I got in the car, shut the door gently, and rested my hands on the wheel. I didn't start the engine right away. I just sat there, watching the porch light flicker once before holding steady. There's a kind of silence after war. It's not peace, it's debris. I breathed in, shoulders still tight from the weight of the dinner that had just unfolded. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I reached for it, expecting a check-in from Mia, or a one-word text from Donna trying to soften the night. But it wasn't either. Subject: "We've chosen your design." The email preview stopped me mid-breath. I opened it fully. A firm out of Seattle, prestigious, known for their civic projects, had selected my concept for their downtown cultural center. My design, chosen from over 70 entries. Implementation scheduled for spring. There it was. Validation, not requested, not lobbied for, not coaxed from anyone's hand, just earned. Proof doesn't beg to be seen, I whispered to myself, still staring at the screen. It just waits. I started the car, drove in silence. Later that evening, after I'd showered and changed into an old t-shirt and socks that didn't match, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Joran. I stared at his name for a full 10 seconds before answering. "Malis?" he said, voice flat. "Joran," I replied, equally blank. "So this was your moment, huh?" he continued. "You planned this." I didn't rise. I didn't flinch. "No," I said. "I just stopped planning around you." He scoffed. "You needed to do all that just to... what? Prove something?" I walked into the kitchen, Poured myself a glass of water. Let the silence sit. You needed to humiliate us? That one wasn't a question. It was a wound, unwrapped and raw. I took a slow sip. I needed to stop letting myself be edited. That did something. I heard his breath catch slightly. You could have just called. You didn't have to put on a whole show. I didn't put on a show, I said. You just finally saw something that wasn't about you. He was quiet then. I stood by the kitchen window, watching the neighbor's porch light flicker like Valora's had. Maybe old wiring, maybe ghosts. Joran finally spoke again. His voice lower now, bitter maybe, or just deflated. I guess we'll see who gets invited next Thanksgiving. I didn't hesitate. That's the thing, Joran. I don't need an invitation to feel whole anymore. There was a pause, a long one, and then the line went dead. Not disconnected, just done. 3 days passed. No calls, no voicemails, no awkward texts from cousins trying to smooth things over with emojis and apologies that weren't theirs to give. And honestly, I didn't expect them. I didn't need them. The silence wasn't an absence. It was a response. One I had spent years pretending not to notice. This time, I let it echo. My studio remained quiet too. I didn't open any new client files, didn't return messages about potential speaking engagements. I watered my plants, made French press coffee in the late morning instead of rushing through it at 7 a.m. sharp. I let myself sit still, really sit, and realize how long it had been since my days felt like mine. On the evening of the third day, my phone lit up with a message. It was from Valora. If one day you want to talk, I won't speak first. I'll just listen. No emojis. No love, Mom. No pressure to respond. Just space. Finally, space that didn't feel like another trap disguised as concern. I stared at it for longer than I cared to admit. Not because I didn't know what I wanted to say, but because, for once, it didn't feel like I had to say anything at all. I didn't reply. At least not immediately. Some messages aren't meant to be answered. They're meant to sit, to be held up to the light, then placed down gently. The next morning, I went for a walk. It had rained the night before, and the sidewalks still shimmered under the Portland sky. Damp leaves stuck to driveways, and the scent of wet earth was heavier than the usual fall chill. A boy wobbled on a bicycle near the corner, his mother trailing behind him with gentle encouragement. Across the street, a woman trimmed the last of her garden's roses, while a couple on a bench laughed about something I couldn't hear. It felt like the city had gone on living, even while I'd pressed pause. And maybe that was the point. Family isn't just inherited, it's witnessed, it's chosen, it's built one act of consistency at a time. Not just blood, but belief. Belief in who you are, even when no one else has the courage to say it out loud. Back home, I sat by the big window in my studio and pulled out a blank sketch pad. No deadlines, no client notes, just open pages. It had been weeks since I'd drawn anything that wasn't billable. I sketched slowly. Light outlines, ideas for a space that didn't exist yet. Maybe a reading nook under a slanted roof, or a garden-facing wall filled with glass. Maybe it would never be built. Maybe it didn't need to be. Not everything needs to be sent. Some victories are just lived. By late afternoon, I opened my calendar. The Thanksgiving event was still sitting there. Dinner at Valora's, 5 p.m. I clicked it, hovered for a second, then hit delete. And in its place, I created a new one. Home Solo. I typed it, sat back, and smiled at how strange it felt to name a plan that had no guests, but how whole it felt too. Then, just as I was about to hit confirm, my phone buzzed again. Incoming call, Joran. Joran's name flashed across my phone screen like a warning, not a welcome. I let it ring twice. Just enough time to remember all the times I'd called him and gone to voicemail. All the family group chats where my name was mentioned in lowercase, if at all. Then I answered. Not out of curiosity, but control. His voice was softer than usual. Mom asked me to reach out, he said. She's been off lately. I stared at the wall in front of me, a bare section of drywall I hadn't decided what to hang yet. Something about the emptiness of it gave me clarity. If she wants to talk, I said. She knows where I live. I'm not walking toward people who never once turned around. He didn't argue. He just said, okay, and hung up. Later that evening, I pulled out the old family photo albums from a box I hadn't touched in years. The covers were worn, corners softened, the pages warped from time, and a few too many humid summers in Valora's attic. Most of the photos followed a pattern. Joren front and center, arms around someone, usually smiling. Me, blurred, cropped, turned sideways in the background like a set piece. Then I found it. A picture from one of my childhood birthdays, maybe 10 or 11. Joren had just won a trophy for something and was beaming in the middle. Off to the right, almost falling out of frame, was me. Half a smile. Eyes looking toward the cake, not the camera. I scanned the photo, cropped it, printed it large. It was only me in the new version. My face clear, my joy undisturbed. I framed it and placed it in the hallway of my studio. Beneath it, in small etched lettering, I was always there, you just looked past me. A week later, I was watering my plants when I heard the knock at the door. No call, no warning, just Valora. She stood there in a long wool coat, holding something wrapped in brown paper. I didn't invite her in with words. I just stepped aside. She sat on the edge of the couch, like she didn't expect to stay long. Then she placed the bundle on the coffee table, unwrapped it. An old photo album, the kind with plastic sleeves and handwritten captions in her tight cursive. "These are yours," she said, not quite looking at me. I kept them. I didn't know why then. I do now. I didn't touch the album. Not out of defiance, just distance. I let it sit. She didn't apologize, and I didn't ask for one. "This isn't about punishment, Mom," I said finally. "It's about awareness. That's more than I ever got." She nodded, blinking fast, her hands trembling slightly. "You don't need to come back," she whispered. "I just wanted you to know I see you now." That night, after she left, I hung the cropped photo in my entry hall, a place where I could see it every day, not to remind myself of what they missed, but of what I finally claimed. Below it, on a small wooden bench, I placed the album Valora had brought. Still closed, still hers. I looked at both and whispered, "I'm not closing the door. I'm just not holding it open anymore." As I turned off the lights for the night, my phone buzzed. An email. Subject: "We'd love to feature you on our next episode of Invisible Daughters."